Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third workshop in the Kauai Diversification Project. This is a project that is sponsored by the Pacific Islands Fisheries Group. My partner, Clay Tam, and I welcome you to the third meeting of our expert panel that are going to share their insights on how they diversified. I ask everybody to remember that we're being recorded, and these panelists' views and advice and information will be shared to our community via the recorded workshops. And as soon as possible, we will be posting them online along with other resources. So if you're joining us today, please mute your mic while you're part of the workshop, but I'll point out the chat and raise your hand if you have a question after our panelists complete or finish their first presentation. I will say that I'm hoping that everybody will follow the Project Ahi Hub Kauai is the moniker via Facebook and Instagram, and hopefully very soon Ahi Hub Kauai's very own website where we'll post all of the resources. All right, so I'm really thrilled to introduce our four panelists today. It's Pete Halme, Jen Costa, Mark oh my goodness, Mark, I'm going to mispronounce your name, but Kuila.
It's Kuila, there you go.
Mark Kuila, I wanted to get his Finnish name pronounced properly. So Jen, Steve Schleibauer, and Pete Halme, I probably got disrupted there. But there are four panelists, and these panelists include two of the gentlemen that I've known the longest at the start of this project. And I would say that Mark and Pete from San Diego and Oregon and Washington, it was by talking to these individuals and meeting them in person, actually, Mark and his family, and touring their family cannery, that I really got inspired. And that's their conversations allowed us to generate the enthusiasm and the energy to draft the Saltonstall-Kennedy proposal. So I'd particularly like to thank them for getting us to this point. And the newest person that I've met, newest expert that I'm thrilled about is Jen Costa. And I was put in touch with Jen, who is our Kauai gal, that I learned was an expert on one of the most important things that we know is for seafood sales and distribution and quality. And as you'll hear later, Jen is a really important part of how we may go forward and think about going forward. She'll have the skills and the ideas to for what Kauai producers need to know. And so that's why this is a special group in our third and final expert panels from elsewhere. So I'm going to start this morning with Pete Halme. And if I could ask everybody to, yeah, we've got somebody else to remember that we're being recorded and the mic should be off except for our speaker. Pete, if you check from his bio, Pete Halme is the founder of the Tuna Harbor Dockside Market in San Diego, among many other things. He's been a commercial fisherman, sea urchin diver, fisherman for many, many years. He does say he has no plans to retire. But the things that strike me from his work in his bio, some of the highlights that I'm sure he can touch on, is that Pete was very much interested in developing the social capital needed for the sea urchin fishery. And that was back when he got into all of this stuff. There's a long list of organizations that he either founded or helped develop into professional organizations. But what he did is he noted to me that initially what they were up against, and Pete was up against, was the lack of local infrastructure at the port level to support the kind of boat to table and fresh fish delivery operation that he and his collaborators felt was necessary. Among many other community organizations that he founded or worked with, San Diego community-based association, the Fishermen's Working Group, the Seafood Harvesters. In 2014, he and his collaborators formed the Tuna Harbor Dockside Market. And the goals were to market San Diego fish direct to the consumer. The other important advice that he, or experience that he pointed out was that this successful market packed from 500 to 800 customers every Saturday. So incredible draw. The main goal of the market, he said at the outset, was to receive a fair price for the fishermen's fish. And of course, that's the goal of all of our ocean producers. But after a bunch of time and experiences, good and bad, probably mostly good, he said that we realized that the main goal was to sell fishing and the community of the fish, and not just the fish. And so with that introduction, I'd like to introduce Pete Halme.
My name is Pete Halme. I'm a commercial fisherman and have been since 1970. So everything I look at is through the lens of a commercial fisherman. I don't see any other way of looking at life except how does it affect the community and the fishermen individually. So when we started the market, as Molly said, we set out just to make a few more bucks to make sure that we got a fair price. But as it turned out, we were fishing that even in a huge area like San Diego, where fishing had been very important with the tuna, it was a tuna capital of the world for many years. When the tuna fleet left, it seemed like people thought there was no more fishing left. And as hard as it was to believe, people asked me, where do I buy fresh fish off the dock? And I said, you can't. It doesn't exist unless you want New Zealand fish, in which case you can go buy it. But and so in a town like San Diego, we saw that you couldn't buy, and everybody, you know, whether it was tourists and so on, wanted to go down to the docks to buy fish. So we said, well, that's a simple premise. Let's do it. And it took 3 years. I learned how to make PowerPoint presentations to councils, commissions, and various groups explaining what it is we wanted to do. And so the port said, sounds like a real good idea. Why don't you go to the Department of Health and see if they approve it? So when I went to the Department of Health, they said, hey, sounds like a good idea. Why don't you go to the port and see if they approve it? And we got on this merry-go-round for 3 goddamn years. So we kept going and going back and forth, until I talked to a young lady friend of mine who was a writer, and she wrote up our dilemma. That it seemed like a simple premise. Everybody wanted it, and nobody knew how to do it. After she wrote that article, within 2 days, I got a call from the port commissioner, the head of the port commission, and the county supervisor said, how do we get this thing done? I said, well, just got to sign these damn papers and get it started. And they called a press conference and got the TV cameras down and said, these fishermen will open in 2 weeks. And that was it. And all of a sudden, after 2 years of talking to everybody and so on, it was that simple. And when I went into the port, they handed me a form and they said, yeah, you got to fill out this form. And I said, that's the same goddamn form you've been giving me for 2 or 3 years. I'm tired of it. And he says, they told us just sign the bottom, give us the $250 and get out of here. And the same thing with Department of Health, just give us the money, sign it on the bottom. And it said farmers market. And I said, no, we got a fisherman's market. It's not the same. So they crossed out farmers and put in fishermen. And then I signed it. And we started, but we had a dilemma because in the law, there was no such thing as a fisherman's market. It didn't exist in the law. So we had to pass a new law making fisherman's market exist. And of course, when they came to a fisherman and said, you got to write a new law, I laughed at it for a while. It's a real good idea. I think it's fantastic, but no thanks. So the commissioner said, we'll give you the staff, we'll give you everything, and we'll put it together. And with the help of the Department of Environmental Health and the port and everybody else, we submitted a law that went through the legislature with 0 negative votes and was signed into law by the governor. That year, there was never anything that went through that easily because everybody saw this is beautiful. It should be done. It was just the roadblock. And this was a big change because it laid out in the Department of Health that we didn't have to go through the stringent regulations that a corporation would have to do if the customer bought the fish there, had it cut up there and handed back to the customer, we didn't have to do many of the other hoops they had to go through. And this was written into law, and also written into law that it would have to be local commercial fishermen selling, and they were allowed to sell only for themselves and two other fishermen. So you could have fishermen selling for yourself and others. And that's how we started. Among great deal of fanfare on the first day, this was going to be Pike's Market. Oh, they're opening up Pike's Market. And of course, it wasn't Pike's Market. It was three fishermen selling 3 or 4 items. And 1,500 people showed up. And we had those 3 fishermen and said, what are we going to do? we didn't expect this kind of thing. But what happened is all of a sudden we realized, or the fishermen realized, there's a demand for this. And the next day, 3 more fishermen, 5 more fishermen, and so on. And within the first year, we had about 18 or 20 fishermen that wanted to sell at the market. And I got to press the idea that it's important to have diversity in what you sell at the market. Not only the top of the line, we sell tuna and so on, but we didn't realize mackerel would sell. We didn't realize top snails, all kinds of other things that we didn't know would sell. And I'll give you an example. Mackerel used to be a bait fish and sold for 60 cents a pound. At the market today, it's selling for $6 a pound. It's more than the tunas. And there's a certain group of people that will come only for the mackerel. One thing we didn't know would sell would be the fish heads. We kept using it for bait. Then we put it out there, and we have a Filipino and the Thai community that come down strictly for the fish heads. There's almost nothing in the ocean that somebody doesn't like. And it's only a matter of attracting them. How do you attract them? To make sure that they understand that it's not just tuna that you have, it's whatever else you can catch that's legal, and you can start marketing it. The other lesson we learned is try it. Don't worry about it. Try it. If it fails, you quit it and do something else. Don't go through a focus group and 85 meetings. Just do it. Every week, do something different. Try little things here, there, and everywhere. And you'll find it doesn't work or it does work. First thing we found out was people don't like to buy whole fish. They didn't know what to do with it. So we had to open up a cutting booth. You talk about lack of facility. We roll out a cutting booth on the pier. We have water in large 55-gallon containers, wastewater. We process that way, and we remove the waste off the pier and so on. We've established this thing that's independent of anything else. All we needed was electricity. And we roll it out. They arrive around 5 o'clock in the morning, ready to go at 7 o'clock. And in the evening, we roll it back in. And that's the end of it. We also found that displaying all the fish was very important. So we have these ice tables, 6-foot long ice table with ice on it, and we lay out all the fish on the ice. We keep them cold, so it's healthy and so on, but people want to see it. They want to see it, and some of them have to poke the eyeballs and so on to make sure, and they want to look inside the mouth and the gill and so on. But we allow this to happen. We don't let them touch it anymore. We do it for them because of COVID. But they want to see the fish. So just a mere picture of the fish doesn't make it. There's an example. For 2 years, we sold whole fish. And one day, a young man showed up and he bought a 20-pound tuna, and he was on his bicycle. So we taped the tuna to his bicycle with duct tape, and he rode off the pier with the tuna on his bicycle. And I told the story to the commissioners, and they said, you see, there's a saying that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Now there's proof. There's proof that the fish doesn't need a bicycle. But we started cutting up the fish, and it opened up the thing to the usual American customer who just wants to put it on a barbecue and eat it. They don't want to fillet fish. Here in a large city, even if you knew how to fillet it, where would you put the stuff that you weren't using? You couldn't throw it in the trash. So by setting up the cutting booth, we allowed this to happen. What we did was start charging. We did it for free as a free gesture with a tip jar there. And we fast realized that there's a whole community in San Diego that thought tipping was against their moral nature. So we had about 30% of people contributing tip. So we had to change it to 50 cents a pound. We charge them 50 cents a pound up to a maximum of $5 or $10 and so on to cut up the fish. And we haven't seen any complaints. We cut up the fish. Some of the people want to take the heads home and everything to do whatever they want to do. And then we take the, what we have left over, we have the trap fishermen, and we give them the carcasses. So they use it in their, for bait for fishing. So when we started, and again, I don't ever talk about selling my catch. I don't think it's important, but that's easy to do. If all you want to do is sell your catch, it doesn't take much. How do you get a whole community of fishermen together, that they're in it together, that they want this market to succeed for all of them, and not just so each individual makes money, that the whole market has to succeed? And how do you buy them into that idea so that this happens? And this is the difficult part, and it's also the most rewarding part. When the guy calls me up and he says, I don't have much, but I want to bring it anyhow because I think people like this product, then they'll come to the market. And it's counterintuitive, but the more different species we have at the market, the more each one of them sells. That people get to see them and choose, and they say, I've never tried that. Maybe I'll try a couple pounds of that. And so the more species you have, the better you are. The more fishermen you have, the more species. But right away, we got into a dilemma. If you come to the market, let's say with 200 pounds of rockfish, you have the anticipation that you'll sell all of it. Because what are you going to do bringing 50 pounds home? What are you going to do with that? So when we see that a lot of people are bringing the same fish, we thought, if 3 people bring rockfish and they only sell 50 pounds each and they got to go home with 100 pounds, they're not going to keep coming back to the market. So we established a thing called legacy vendors, that certain species would be sold by these people. And if they couldn't bring it, then somebody else could sell it. But if they were there and brought in enough fish that would meet the demand, that we wouldn't ask somebody else to come. This met with a lot of criticism, but a lot of reaction. But what I found is that as a manager, you're successful if the fisherman comes to you and said, you're really too strict with me and you're not strict enough with anybody else. And if they all say that, you're going to pretty much hit the right medium and manage to piss everybody off, which is for an old man, it's kind of part of my nature. So we had this idea, and it has worked quite well. The only thing we worry about is if they run out, then we got to have some mechanism that somebody else can come, and that's very difficult because if they're not prepared, then you can't do it. So let me run you through a week. We have a market that opens at 8 o'clock every Saturday and closes at 1 o'clock. We've been going for 8 years, and in 8 years we've missed 3 markets. All the other markets we've had. So we've almost 365 days or 52 weeks of the year we've had the market. And what this week starts, today's Wednesday. Tonight, I'll send out a call, a text to 16 to 20 fishermen, say, what do you think you're bringing this week? And I have them all on the same list so they can look at everything that I'm asking. I'm not asking each one individually. And they'll come on and they'll say, I don't have anything yet. I'm going fishing on Friday. I'll let you know when I get in. And so that way we start forming, what does this market going to look like? I asked them for species, price, and approximate quantity. And so when they see rockfish, 3 guys come on and said, I have 200 pounds of rockfish. The 4th guy looks at that and said, I don't think we can sell that much. I don't think we can sell that much. I'm not going to come to the market to sell that. Or I'm going to fish for something else on Friday and bring that. And this is something that they work out. The manager doesn't tell anybody what to bring, how to bring it, how to do anything. We treat them, each booth is like the guy's captain of that ship, and he makes all the decisions. We provide the wherewithal. What we do is provide the wherewithal, the advertising, and so on, and he does everything else. But they have figured out how to get one price. Nobody's going to come there and undercut the guy next to him and so on. They work these things out, and the beauty of seeing over the last 8 years, seeing fishermen learn how to work together to do these things is part of if we could translate that to managing the fisheries, would be all set. But we have to learn this. Management of the markets is just as important as the catch, because the last thing you want to do is all end up in the same place. You don't want to go for your catch in the same place. You don't want to go for the market in the same place. So you got to spread it out to everybody else. And that's the part we've strived for all along, is to make sure that we include as many fishermen as we possibly can. And if we can include more species and there's not a fisherman selling it, then we encourage them to join us. And right now we have, over the last 8 years, we've worked with about 30, 35 fishermen, and we have about 16 steady fishermen that can be counted on week after week. The thing that I noticed, and this was something that we didn't think of, the ones that work the best are the ones whose wives or kids are there. That seems to be part of the need for taking a day off and going there, is if your family's there. Then if they want to go fishing, after a while, the wives and the kids do a much better job of selling the fish than the fisherman does. The fisherman knows a lot about fish. He doesn't know much about being nice to the customers who ask stupid questions. They get really stuck with that idea. So the wives understand it because they deal with their husbands, so they know stupid questions from the get-go. So to give you an idea of, we sell about 26 species of fish every Saturday, but we have 50 species of rockfish, for example, that we have access to. And I think this thing is, the important part about that is there's somebody that wants any one of those things. So on a Friday afternoon around 4 o'clock, on the Facebook page for Tuna Harbor Dockside Market, we'll go to a list of all the species and the prices that we have. And over the years, we've built up to 14,000 followers on Facebook and Instagram. And I won't talk too much about it because you've already heard everything I know about it. So that's all I know about it. We hired a young lady, and that's where, if you don't have anybody under 25 years old, you're probably stuck with that. That's who you get, a young lady that knows it's intuitive to do anything on her iPad or iPhone or whatever, and they can put that together with very little problems. And the other thing we noticed, if you do that, better have some pictures. If you don't have pictures, you're going to lose your customers. They're not interested. If you have pictures of people fishing out there on the water, you'd be amazed. And you can judge that because you could see the likes and so on. All of a sudden you have 180 likes. And when you just describe something, you have 2 likes. It's very dramatic. The action shots and pictures are absolutely necessary to sell the idea.
If I could basically interrupt you there to say that you have given us an incredible basically way forward as to how a fish stock could work. And honestly, I'm sure we could have you for an entire workshop seminar. And for the sake of time for today's Zoom, I'm going to have to keep us moving. But I wanted to say that your experience there and at the level of insights and knowledge learned is incredible. And I hope you know that we're going to come back to you again going forward, because the level of information of how you did it, what worked and what didn't, it's incredibly valuable. So I would like to bring in our next speaker, and Pete, will, as we've told everyone, follow-up questions will come from emails and others. So I hope you're prepared. If not directly in the live session, you might get some questions from me from the community follow-up. So thanks so much, Pete. Incredible business. I'd like to put my glasses on. Thanks, Pete. And introduce Steve Schleibauer, who actually Pete and Steve have worked together. And I was lucky enough to meet Steve in person when he happened to be visiting Kauai this past winter. And Pete basically said, you really should speak to Steve. He's done a lot of different things that would be important for a commercial fishing dock or commercial fishing operations. So Steve is currently the founder and principal of the Marine Alliances Consulting operation in Santa Cruz, California. And he's been involved in, as all of our speakers, in many aspects of direct market community fisheries. He served as the harbor master at Santa Cruz and Monterey over a very long time. I won't say how long, check out his bio. And I also know, as Kauai people will really get, he's been a lifeguard and a waterman for most of his life. And so he really gets what the ocean means on every level. He notes that he's managed a waterfront, that managing a waterfront requires understanding the needs of the commercial fisherman as a key customer. And consequently, he said he had to become a student of fisheries management and science. And I can attest that he really is. In 2000, he co-founded the nonprofit Alliance of Communities for Sustainable Fisheries, and the mission of which is connecting fishermen with their communities. And of course, that's the underlying goal here. During the last years, you see from his bio, he's led the development of fishing community sustainability plan to revitalize commercial fishing and strengthen its connections to the community. And these are serious goals of just about everybody we speak to on Kauai, not to mention the rest of the Hawaiian Islands. So he's actually now, I know he's busy with the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust, which is a local nonprofit to secure ground fishing rights in the region, and many other things. So I would like to introduce Steve to our community, and we're very pleased to have his participation. And if I could ask everyone to mute their mics. Thanks, and welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you, Molly. And after that introduction, I think I ought to shut up while I'm ahead. So yeah, I wanted to go over a couple things that are happening in California that I hope will resonate a bit with the fishermen on Kauai. I want to talk for just very briefly about the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust as a community organization, and then talk about my work with the San Diego Fishermen's Working Group, of which Pete Halme is the president. And then last, I'll give a few sort of thoughts about, from my old harbor master hat about working with harbors and how they can help you or hurt you. And so, to begin with, on the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust, it began with a report that I wrote about 10 years ago that outlined the things that the city of Monterey needed to do to enhance and preserve its commercial fishing industry. And there was a lot of nuts and bolts, excuse me, in that, like ice machines. But one of the main things was you need to create a nonprofit organization that can really carry the water on helping fishermen in just a wide variety of ways. And so a 501c3 nonprofit was formed by a set of community leaders, and it has really been quite active and done a lot of good work in the community. Everything from advocating for regulation changes in the political arena, to trying to secure grants for ice machines, to helping fishermen when they have to apply for disaster funding, to COVID grants. They produce a weekly bulletin called Buoy Bulletin that contains information about where you can buy local seafood, if it's off the boat sales, what restaurants are selling local, and even includes some kind of homey type fish recipes. And so, and it also contains a lot of information for fishermen about the management process and what have you. So they're doing all these things. They recently also got some grants to produce meals through a Meals on Wheels program for senior citizen. And they produced around 50,000 meals over a year and a half, and that's still ongoing. So they're having a community of impact. And my main message with talking about this is the need for some leadership and organizing so that you can get community-wide support for fishermen, for what they need and to advance them. So I want to move on now to the San Diego Fishermen's Working Group. It's another nonprofit organization. It's got a board of directors of 9 people plus alternates, and they represent the different gear types that fish. And so we're talking about swordfish and tunas and lobster and sea urchins and what have you. So all those different gear types are represented. And it again is to create a unified voice for fishermen in the region and other processes, state and federal processes. So that, you know, on the adage that they need to stick together to have any power at all. And so my work with them began just mostly on kind of some real estate stuff that they were negotiating with the port and with the developer. But it really migrated into also trying to help them and work with them on some of the big questions confronting fishermen probably everywhere. You know, the question of how do you get more value, you know, from your labor, and how do you expand markets? I mean, just the question that every fisherman has. And also, you know, the San Diego area suffers the same problem that almost every place does, that so much of the seafood products is being imported. Something like between 65 to 85% in our region is imported or aquaculture raised. And so it's displaced the demand for, you know, for wild capture fish. Also, our Sea Grant did a study of the San Diego region and found that only 8% of the seafood restaurants sold locally caught seafood, and 8%. And there were others that maybe sold some, but also had a lot of other, you know, like farm raised Atlantic salmon, those kind of products. And there were a lot of seafood restaurants, you know, again, quote unquote, that sold no local products at all. It was all imported from other areas. And then also, you know, continuing the landscape here, you've got the problem that a lot of areas have, that in different environmental groups just are hammering endlessly on overfishing and other things that aren't necessarily true, or really not at all true in the US, but still it creates this impression in the public that they should avoid eating seafood. So, you know, that's the background. And, you know, with that, for a long time, you know, there's been little sporadic efforts to sell, to direct market seafood, off the boat sales. Pete very well described, you know, 8 years ago, beginning the dockside market, which is a huge event in San Diego. You know, individual fishermen may have had their own markets and selling directly to certain restaurants and chefs that they had a relationship with, but this was all very low scale. A lot of the larger volume products were still going to buyers, and the buyers would then distribute with, you know, the markups that they need or want. And so that was the dynamic. And so when we talk about, you know, direct marketing, you have to really also be aware of this dance that exists between the fish buyers and fishermen, you know, where an enlightened buyer, and I use the word enlightened in my opinion, you know, they're going to recognize that fishermen need to stay in business. And so if they have to sell some products direct to get more value out of it, you know, that's still good for them because the fishermen's still fishing and they're still going to get some products. A less enlightened, again, my opinion, buyer is going to say, you know, basically, heck with you, you know, you're going to compete with me. You know, I'm not buying any of your products. I either buy it all or I buy none. And so, and then that also sets up the dynamic where the fisherman who, you know, maybe goes to a market or farmer's market or whatever, and then, you know, needs to sell the rest of his volume to somebody. And so the buyer can say, you know, go away, I'm not going to do that. So anyway, those are issues, relationship issues that need to be worked out. So then we have the pandemic coming, and so that just really, messed everything up. And the big buyers weren't buying for sure because they couldn't sell to restaurants. The restaurants weren't buying from individual fishermen because they were closing. And it was really a world of hurt at the beginning stages. And then, of course, another background is the economic blows that happened to the whole, community about, basically the problem of the food insecure was just magnified by the pandemic. And so out of that, the fishermen kind of got together and how can we get some good out of the situation? And so came up with the idea of creating a grant request to the San Diego Community Foundation. And so it was going to fund a program that we called Fish to Families. And this program was really multifaceted as we pitched it to them. It was going to, number one, keep people fishing, create a new market for them, especially for high volume and or underutilized species, which might also be lower value species that made, providing these meals to the food insecure more realistic. Also, a goal was establishing a partnership with local kitchens using our seafood as the protein source. So new relationships there with kitchens. Another goal, maybe surprisingly, but to train chefs on how to break down whole fish and how to get really the maximum meat and nourishment out of each individual fish. Extend the meals provided through the program because of this for things like creating soups out of the bones and other stock, heads and what have you, at the end of it. So we got about 20% more meals out of this program just because the chefs were able to do that. And then another goal, just a general one, establish just more and broader community relationships, starting out with a new relationship with the foundation, but also relationship with the kitchen and a variety of chefs, relationship with the different food distribution programs, had the admiration of the large San Diego Port Commission for the project. And so it was really a winner in terms of establishing new relationships and putting local seafood really out front as a positive thing. And then lastly, educate chefs and hopefully then their wait staff on the sustainability of US caught and locally caught seafood. And we had a partnership there with California Sea Grant and also NOAA Fisheries, their education arm, provided some written materials on that. And so, part of this ended up being a very, very positive relationship with an entity called Open Gym, very capable group that could do all these things and put out complete meals, basically for around, I think it ended up being around $4 a meal, although they were free to the public. That's just what our costs were. And we put out 42,000 meals in a little less than a year. And so, again, all those goals were met. New markets helped out fishermen. It wasn't really a high volume thing, but still it helped some key people. And so this also then led to further thinking about developing other direct marketing strategies. And in terms of responding to the pandemic, things like increased off the boat sales occurred. There's one fisherman who actually, through a website, began delivering products. Another, use of, this is actually not from San Diego, but from Central California, where one fisherman I know uses his onboard computer and a listserv he's developed. And so he's a salmon fisherman. If he comes in with 60 fish, he sends out a message when he's a couple of hours out to this whole big list. I've got 60 fish, $10 a pound. I'll be at this dock at this time. And he sells them all, very, very easily. So all those kind of strategies and techniques were being developed. Another really large effort that's underway now is to create a fish house. Could also be called a fish hub, but it would be a place for cold storage and some limited gear storage, perhaps ice production, and limited fish processing if we can get the health department clearances. And so the key thing with the fish hub or fish house is that it allows fishermen to extend the life of their products in a high quality setting. And so when they can have that, then they can hopefully smooth out the glut market problem, and just generally be able to manage their sales a lot better if they're in control of when those sales occur. And so we're in the early stages of that. We've created a business plan. We're looking for money. We have a building site available. So we've made some progress, but it hasn't really, quite come together yet. Also at this very time, we have just, in a partnership with another entity, put in a USDA grant request for a 2.5-year marketing program to market local seafood to the general public. And that means hiring somebody for 2.5 years who's devoted to using all the media sources, including social media, to get local seafood out in front of the public. And so, we're hoping that really stimulates everything. Another little sidebar thing is to, in the early stages also of developing a festival, probably something like a yearly festival that would be titled some version of local seafood, global flavor. And we put it that way because San Diego is an area with very diverse community, different immigrant populations, and what have you. And so, these populations all have different ways of preparing seafood. And so we think that that's going to be a really big event, well attended, what have you. There'll be a lot of interest in that. So those are kind of what's happening. The challenges are, a lot of them are centered around, how do you extend the life of your product, and those really go to, how you're handling your product on board, what have you. Is there ice? Is there onboard refrigeration? Is there continuing ice, not just on board, but some kind of a cold storage thing that you can extend that. A really big one is one that Pete already touched on with the dockside market is the whole fish versus fillet thing. You've got a vast market in a tourist destination like Kauai in tourists, but they can't manage a 20-pound tuna. And so, they need to walk away with a bag of fillets that they can take home to their barbecue or whatever. And so, recommendation is to try to establish relationships with existing kitchens, that's existing restaurants and what have you, whether those kitchens can be used after hours, rented or that kind of thing. But to somehow get past, the problem of the whole fish. And, even local people, I imagine, a fair number of local people don't really want to deal with the whole fish for different reasons. So that's a really key thing to solve. Then also little things like really trying to work with the individual restaurants to feature your local fishermen on their chalkboards or their menus. This fish is caught by this vessel, by this fisherman, that kind of thing. And easy to do on a chalkboard. You don't have the same product every day, perhaps, but you erase it and you start something else. And so, those can really, generate the community relationships between your fishermen and the public that you really need to develop. There's other thoughts, like, and I think tuna would be really good for this, is, the smoke products, another way of extending the life of the product. And, there's some health requirements for that also, but it's doable. And then also working with your buyers, whoever they are, on value-added meal packaging. It's not just the fish fillet, but it's also the yam or the bell pepper or whatever. There's several different other products in the same package that you walk away with. I don't know to what extent you have that in Kauai already, but that's something that's gaining in popularity here in California. So with that, I want to just maybe give a few thoughts about harbor management and that kind of thing. And Molly, shut me up if I'm going over here. So I did work over a 42-year period on the waterfront in Santa Cruz and Monterey. And they were both government-owned harbors. And so there was this government relationship that I had with, my employer. In both those cases, the harbor management, meaning me, and also the city council or elected commission, came to appreciate the value of commercial fishermen as a key client. And not just because they pay berth rent and maybe they pay wharfage also. I don't know if you have that, but more for the fact that they're bringing in these local fresh products that directly enhance the oftentimes larger tourism-based economies of the area. And so there's a lot of reasons, and also, of course, cultural reasons, a lot of reasons why harbor management really, ought to be listening to the needs of fishermen and helping them out and what have you. I certainly know that's not the case everywhere. And of course, you also may have private owners of the marinas and what have you, who may have an entirely different view of it. But whichever way it is, it's important that fishermen, again, create some organization, have some sense of leadership, and work together to impress their value on that management, whether it's private or public. And this also goes for the larger governmental entities like your county, to impress on your county about your economic role and everything. And you should be really out there with the county asking for help for things like don't you have a grant writer? Don't you have somebody who can investigate grant opportunities for us and then prepare those grants? That would be a real natural thing, I think, a natural ask, for fishermen to make of their local government. So I think I'm pretty much done with that. Maybe the last thing is that, fishermen really everywhere have natural partners. Natural partners in the tourism industry, natural partners in food banks, in cultural centers, what have you. And that, your leadership in your community needs to really, apply some glue to those things and really, start having them all view, fishing as very much a part of those other activities. So with that, that's my deal.
Thanks so much, Steve. That's an incredible, almost a roadmap that you're kind of a lot of putting together a lot of the pieces that were so critical to building important and long-lasting entities, San Diego and Monterey and everything else, and incredibly helpful recommendations. And I'm so grateful for the recording, that as we're capturing all of your comments, and I know for Jen, who we've talked a bit about this when we first met each other. So we really appreciate those very practical and very important how-to steps, and know that you are someone that's done it and have managed a lot of that effort to get the money and to get the attention along with Pete. And so thanks again very much. And I'm sure we're going to have, for sure, some follow-up on your recommendations that are really, I think, really applicable to Kauai. And so thanks again. And questions may come in email form to you all later, if not today. So I'd like to, thanks very much. Mark Quila is our next panelist expert. And I have to say that Mark has worn many hats. In fact, since I've met him, he's currently Columbia Memorial Hospital head of development. So talk about a very important job. So it's not exactly fishing related anymore, but it's important to the community. But I know Mark introduced because of his family's online presence as a very well-known and important cannery for the town, was it Warrenton? If I get that wrong, Mark, sorry. But this Skipanon brand seafood cannery and fish processing plant was founded by Mark's dad, Norman, who I had the pleasure of meeting a few years ago before COVID when I visited them. And Mark's family has been running this iconic plant since 1978. And one thing I urge you to check out, we'll show the resources, web resources to watch the videos. But he notes that the ladies, the women of the cannery, just like in Gloucester, brought over 100 years of filleting expertise of fresh fish to the cannery, and were the best filleters in Oregon. And I know my old neighbor, Gloucester filleter, would probably feel really good about that and say, well, we'd compete too. But anyway, the Cahuillas sold fresh seafood at the Beaverton Farmers Market, and that was the single largest all agricultural market in the state. Mark notes that they sees farmers markets as an opportunity to bring fresh seafood along with high quality canned seafood or tinned seafood direct to customers and consumers. Mark, I know, is also associated with the Astoria Food Hub, which is an incredibly exciting and cool development on the river there in Astoria. One of the reasons why I thought it was really important that he also be, in addition to all his other expertise and canning experience, come to the table here for our Kauai community. He said he and their companies have wanted to bring, to continue to have access to local quality seafood and a superior product at every end, and superior to what's found in grocery stores. But he said, as everybody else has noted, it requires much more outreach and education about the benefits of buying and paying for locally harvested seafood. In his comments, he notes in his bio that more can be done simply by providing the basic infrastructure, keeping taxes and utility costs reasonable, and encouraging better communication between the public and private sectors. And these are themes that you've heard again and again from all of our experts. And I have to say, Mark loves OSU football, but what I'd really like him to do is talk to us about his knowledge about, particularly for Kauai's interest, adding value to products, the values of things like canning and tinning, smoking, among other things, because of course, Kauai has a history in the Hawaiian Islands of canning agricultural products and even aku or skipjack tuna in the past, believe it or not, on Kauai. Okay, I'll stop talking. We're really thrilled to have Mark Wheeler here and his incredible history with his family's seafood business. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Molly, for that very generous introduction. I really enjoyed. Can you hear me? I really enjoyed listening to Pete and to Steve, and I can identify and relate to a lot of what was shared. And Steve, you know, I've been involved with local government here, and they've tried to do a lot of improvements to have an open air market like Pete's talking about, and grow some of that presence on the waterfront, and had some real struggles developing the infrastructure to do so. So I'd like to talk to you more about how we can actually do that here in Astoria as well. You know, at one time, Astoria, Oregon here was home to about 30 canneries on the waterfront. Primarily, these were salmon canneries. And that's the kind of environment my dad actually grew up in. So he fished when he was growing up, and he built a gillnet boat when he was a sophomore in high school. And this was the primary method of fishing on the Columbia River, which was a drift net, and the fish would go upstream, would actually get tangled in it, and they would harvest that way. And again, this was just a huge economic driver for the entire region. And in fact, Bumblebee Seafoods, Pete will like this, Bumblebee Seafood got started in Astoria. It started as a salmon cannery, and then became a tuna cannery, and then relocated to San Diego about 50 or 40 some years ago. But my dad, he earned a degree in oceanography from Oregon State, a master's degree. He decided to continue fishing. He fished up and down the mainland here on the entire West Coast from San Diego to Alaska, fishing tuna and salmon. And then he decided he wanted to pursue ground fishing, so bought a trawler. And my brother actually still is a trawler and fishes ground fish, and that's primarily sole and rockfish and cod. But he wanted to kind of vertically integrate so that it wouldn't be just, you know, catching fish and delivering to a processor that we wanted to process the fish himself. And so back in 1978, created a little processing facility. And so he would fish just one day. So it was day fishery only, ice the fish on the boat, would bring it in at night, ice it in the cold room. The filleters would come the next day, fillet the fish. We'd box it up, ice it, and it'd go on a truck usually, and sometimes by air, but on a truck shipper, 150-pound truck shipper down to San Francisco, San Diego, or Los Angeles were the primary markets for us. And that was through the 80s, really what we did. It was a fairly lucrative gig, and that and salmon fishery on the Columbia River was going strong. And so that's what Oregon Ocean Seafoods did. And that became Skippin' On brand seafoods eventually. But then things really changed in the market in the 90s, and the salmon fishery really dropped off, bottomed out primarily, and the markets in California became more competitive with imported fish and with farm-raised fish. And so we kind of looked to what's the next thing. Let's look at value-added products. You can't compete on volume anymore. What can we do to kind of differentiate ourselves? And so that's where the micro cannery started back in 1995, and a smokehouse, and we built a new kind of processing facility just to do tuna and salmon. We did it, the old-fashioned way before they would double cook tuna. They would actually just back in the bumblebee days, they would cook the fish on the bone and then kind of tear it all off, peel it all off the carcass, and then pack the cans, and then maybe add a little bit of oil back into the can. And we didn't do that. We actually just it was fresh fish at the time. These were from 3 or 4 boats that we would buy from, and they took immaculate care of the fish. Usually they're day fishing, maybe 2-day fishing, and then we would fillet it. Again, as Molly was mentioning, we had some filleters that had spent decades in the industry and were just artists at being able to fillet fish. And they would pack the cans by hand, and then it would only be cooked once in the retort, and it did make a superior product. I mean, the color was better, the texture was better, and certainly the flavor was better. So that is kind of the origin of the canning business that we ended up doing just in local markets, and then started going to farmers markets. And as Molly was mentioning, the Beaverton farmers market was unique in that it was just food products. It was just groceries. A lot of people came there to shop for groceries, and it was produce primarily, but we were the one fish market that was allowed in at the very beginning, and we stayed there for 23 years selling filleted fish. And so we would fillet it, and I would purchase from my brother. So my brother was ground fishing, and he would, of course, catch thousands of pounds, but we would take a few hundred of each species and fillet it on our own and package it in oxygen permeable packaging, and then bring it to the market, and just had built up a real loyal clientele. People loved to see us. Pete was mentioning about having family there. Well, that certainly helped. I had my wife, and people got to know us, and they related to you, and you could tell them the story of where the fish come. People wanted to know where it came from, when it was caught, who caught it, is it sustainable, and you were able to answer all of those questions directly being there at the farmers market. So it was a fantastic business that we just continued to build up and grew, kind of expanded our booth over the years, and then expanded our product range too. We didn't we had started just doing salmon and bottom fish, and then ultimately did crab and oysters, shellfish, shrimp, and then lots of smoked fish. And so we had bought a smokehouse as well, and did primarily vacuum packed smoked products. So it was smoked just in a simple brine, brown sugar, salt brine, and then smoked with alderwood, then vacuum packed and frozen. And you needed to freeze it in order to keep it within your HACCP guidelines, and then would bring that to the market. And we sold quite a bit of smoked fish, and then ultimately jerky and other types of products. So that was kind of the development of the farmers market. But we ended up kind of building a retail shop in our own facility. And what we wanted to do was showcase, as was described, showcase the fishermen, showcase the process. So we did a lot of videos of both our filleters filleting. We had some videos from the boat where Jeff, who was one of the tuna fishermen, he was a solo operation, and he'd go out there with a little camera on the GoPro on his dash or on his deck there, and video everything that he was doing while he was catching the fish. This is both tuna and salmon, and people just love seeing that. And we'd put those on a loop on the TV in our cannery while people came in to buy product. They could look and watch, how the fish was being caught, even though not necessarily the fish that you're buying, but it did do the trick, and people enjoyed seeing that. So, I really got to give it to Pete being able to band fishermen together, because that's one of the hardest things to do. Fishermen are independent by nature, and they don't necessarily want to get in a cooperative or a collaboration. But that is so very important, especially when you're dealing as a small boat, small producer. You need to have shared services. And that's why I'm kind of excited about things like the Astoria Food Hub, which is just getting off the ground here. And they're still, in the construction phase, and they're still in some of the financing phases. But being able to have a shared facility with cold storage, with a certified kitchen, with retail space, with some distribution advantages, is really the way to go for these smaller operations. And if the landscape here in Oregon is anywhere, like it is on some of the West Coast, I mean, we have big processors that have really sucked up a lot of the smaller processors. So they dominate the landscape. Pacific Seafoods, is a huge operation, multiple facilities, thousands of employees. I believe I know that they have hundreds, if not thousands, and then they own their own fleet. So the boats that they buy from are owned by them, and they come and deliver specifically, exclusively to Pacific Seafoods, or one of the larger. So it's harder for a smaller boat or a smaller producer to be able to compete if you don't have that kind of shared services model. And that's why I like to see these co-ops starting in our area, and certainly the Food Hub starting, because I think that they have some particular advantages. But one of the things that was mentioned, and I think Steve and Pete just had mentioned it several times, the consumer is educated, and they certainly demand, a higher, more information about what their product that they're putting in their mouth is. And they also want to know that they're supporting, whether it's a family business or a business that has shared values, or, a business that's innovative in some way. I mean, that's really drives them nowadays. And it wasn't so decades ago, but I think that's something that can really be, I think, catered to, is just providing as much education information as possible. Trying to think of what other things I noticed that one thing the Food Hub is doing is that they are catering to some kind of unique lending institutions that are more towards share, or they're actually kind of crowdsourcing. So people that have the bent towards investing in our agricultural institutions, or have a bent towards those that have sustainable practices, are more willing to lend to places like the Food Hub, and Food Hub is really taking advantage of that. But also, to Steve's point about the local governments, we have a pretty accommodating local government in Clatsop County and in our areas, but it still takes that leadership from someone that has that vision and proposal to kind of bring people along and to encourage, that infrastructure investment and to encourage the lending institutions and those to cooperate. So I think that's one thing that you've got to find that person that's going to be that leader, that's going to be able to communicate that vision to your city councils and to your harbors. And then, other than that, I think I'm excited to know how this kind of manifests and what Kauai is doing, and anxious to hear more, because Kauai is a beautiful place. It's where my wife and I honeymooned 15 years ago. But yeah, it's exciting. Thanks, Molly.
Mark, really appreciate all that insight, and just like every one of our speakers, it's the amount of topics that you covered and are only just getting the surface of the iceberg. I guess that's the surface of the ice is tremendous, and I'm sure, as every one of our speakers, I would have a million questions if it weren't for the time. And just to make you feel good, trust us, you are not leaving Kauai, and everything is settling down. The recommendations that you made that we haven't really gotten to yet in previous panels, but the money, the leadership, probably more than one person needed. But as we sort of wind down this portion of our expert panel conversations, as you're all helping deliver us to the next step area. And I think it's important, as you mentioned, the Astoria Food Hub, for many reasons. Even it's a bigger place than Kauai, the one attribute that I think we have on Kauai that you have in the communities such as Warrenton and Astoria is the size and the sense that we're all in it together, and the desire is to have access to fresh local seafood produced by our neighbors. So thanks for those insights, and we really hope to get you all out here going forward. And what else? Did I have any other comments? Well, thanks again. And again, if there are follow-up questions, you're going to get them by email. And I hope I mentioned that you have been a mayor as well. So you have also that tremendous insight of on the legislative and community side of things. So appreciate your expertise. So that brings us to Jen Costa, who is my latest expert friend and advisor. And Jen is a Kauai resident. She's a Maui girl, I guess, early days from small kid time. But important thing to know about Jen is that she loves to fish too, with her family and friends. And if you please check out her bio, but she attributes her deep appreciation to her father and her family about the importance of sustainability and conservation. And as an island resident, I think Jen gets everything that we're talking about here. And she also understands the Kauai market from being here and understanding what the challenges and the limitations so far are, and also what we don't have in comparison with the other islands that may have more infrastructure and more distribution of their fresh local fish. Jen has a list of the many important oversight organizations and guidance organizations, Hawaii State Department of Agriculture. She has lots of certifications in ag and seafood inspections, which are absolutely vital to selling seafood and marketing seafood, which we know we can't do without. So her experiences and insights on what is needed for Kauai to go forward and to do things on a different, better scale are hugely important. She is, when I first called her and talked to her, cold called her through a mutual friend, I was just immediately struck by her enthusiasm and her knowledge. And I thought, we have a partner in this among other community members. I'm going to introduce her too with a quote. that she shared with me. I would love to help local fishermen and the local market improve and become more efficient in providing stability and security in the supply, and also security for our fishermen and their families. With the cost of everything skyrocketing, as we all know, the cost of fuel, et cetera, we need to try to and keep our local markets stable and successful. And she said she can do anything she can to help. Well, she's already helping. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jen Costa. And I'm happy to have Jen end up our speakers panel because she's bringing it to our next steps. Okay, Jen, where are you, Jen?
All right. Hi, I just want to say thanks to Pete, Steve, and Mark. You gave so much valuable information. I couldn't write it down fast enough. Thank goodness this is recorded. I just wanted to start off by saying that, you know, in Hawaii, we are a tourism-based economy. So pretty much everything our state does is to appease tourists and tourism. So that alone is a huge challenge when you consider that more than half the year, tourists outnumber local people. Yeah, more than half the year on this island. And the difference in between what tourists want and what locals want is that tourists want, you know, the well-known fish like the ahi, the mahi-mahi, and they also, yeah, they can't deal with the whole fish either. But local people prefer, you know, the local reef fish. They prefer the darker meat fish like the akus, not ahis, you know, and it's completely different between the two. And I noticed recently because of COVID, with the farmers markets and everything, the farm to table movement expanded tremendously over COVID because everyone didn't want to go to grocery stores. Everyone wanted to get their stuff from local farmers and everything. And they ended up actually, I think it was the Ulu initiative. They do breadfruit. They do these boxes where they include fish with a recipe made by one of the famous chefs on islands. And they give you all the ingredients you need to take this box home with the fresh fish and cook it. And I thought that was a really good idea. But I mean, it's only a tiny program. And, you know, I'm sure there's only one supplier of the fish for that anyways. But we have a lot of Filipinos, Japanese, Chinese who all use, you know, the parts of the fish that normally tourists wouldn't be interested in. And so that's where I was kind of trying to look into what we can do, you know, to supply that to everyone. And when you go in the supermarkets over here, what pisses my brother off mostly, because he used to be a commercial fisherman, is that the imported mainland treated ahi is selling right next to the fresh caught ahi, but they're both being sold as raw, you know. And he's like, this should never happen. Only fresh ahi should be sold as raw. But in Hawaii, we have such a huge demand for raw fish because everyone likes poke, everyone wants to eat sashimi, and that's all raw cuts of fish. He's just amazed that it's happening. And if you look in the stores, the fresh ahi being sold compared to the mainland one is double, sometimes almost triple the price. So many people walking in the store looking to buy raw fish are gonna go for the mainland previously frozen, treated with gases fish because it's so much cheaper. And offsetting that price difference is a big problem, I think, that we need to work on. But also there is no, like you said, there's no hub where everyone can come together and put ideas together and get the marketing done and get the fish out to everyone. And I know a lot of fishermen who go from restaurant to restaurant trying to sell their fish and end up giving it away to their neighbors and family just so it doesn't go to waste. And it happens a lot. And I really think Kauai could use some kind of facility where, like with canning or even making the cuts of fish at that facility, it would be invaluable. Not to mention it would offset the cost to fishermen with, you know, having to get ice, having to find people to buy their fish. I mean, that would all be taken off the table with that. And I don't know, I think maybe if we could put something like that together, so each side of the island has its own little group of fishermen, and they all create their own little markets and their own little groups. And so there's a North Shore, then there's the West Side guys, and bringing all of them together is also another big challenge, because they all have a lot of difference of opinion. But yeah, the education part, I think, is key into making people come together, because not a lot of people, I know I'm in my neighborhood alone, there's not a lot of people who know where they can get a fresh caught ahi, except for the guy down the road that puts his sign out on the street, And I see most of the locally caught fish here that's being sold is being sold on the side of the road out of coolers from people who have just come back from fishing. That's where I see most of the local fish. And if we could somehow help them out with that, so that they can get their fish sold and for a good price instead of sitting on the side of the road all day, I mean, it would be absolutely invaluable. It would. And also, if we could start with canning or some type of way to supply long-term storage or long-term food supply like canning, then with this supposed recession and everything happening, it's almost, it's needed, definitely needed. And I mean, like I said, it's a very, very small island, but tourists outnumber us most of the time. So the demand from tourists is where the money is. So trying to figure out a system to integrate all of these things into like one specific hub where everyone can come to for this would be the main goal, I guess. And I mean, I see you guys have lots of experience in doing this kind of thing. So thank you all for helping. Yeah, I saw there's someone is doing canning on the island right now, but it's a really, really small scale, and they're doing it in mason jars, and they're selling it only at, the tourist shops and whatever, but they are selling pretty quickly now. So I think if we could tap into that, especially with the food storage part of it, that aspect of it, I think this could really be a promising project. Another problem being on Kauai is that real estate here is more than any other island in Hawaii. So having just getting the building even is, you're gonna have to jump through hoops. I mean, the prices are crazy here. And if you don't have a business that can right off the bat start making profit to keep that business going, and like basic business, you don't really start making money until the first 3 years are up, right? So getting to that point would be a huge hump you have to get over. I mean, there's a lot. Sorry, I'm like, my brain's going all over the place right now because there's so much ideas I've from listening to you guys I've gotten in my head now. So yeah, but definitely with the nonprofit co-op, I think we could apply for a lot of grants. I noticed that there's a lot of USDA grants right now for the seafood industry. There's a lot of micro grants for food security. The deadline's June 6th too, but yeah, a lot of locals over here prefer, the whole fish, but since we're all tourist based, tourism is what's going to happen. We're going to have to dedicate the time mostly to. But another big thing is over here, this island specifically, from the conservation aspect, we have huge environmental laws, and there's a lot of oversight because of conservation and everything of this island. So a lot of, like, we have, because we've got we have so many endangered species on this one island alone, that pretty much anything you do here is gonna have to have an environmental impact statement, and that's another huge hump to get over also. But I mean, this island really, really needs something like this, because I mean, right now the fishermen are struggling, especially when gas is almost $6 a gallon. I don't know how much longer they can keep doing what they're doing if they depend on their catch for living. Otherwise, yeah, pretty much gonna have to go keep importing more and more fish from the mainland because it's actually cheaper, and it's a lot more feasible for a lot of businesses who serve fish here to get their fish from the mainland from these big distributors. And then I did notice that the seafood distributors in Hawaii have expanded their businesses, and they're putting up more and more little warehouses all over the islands. So the need is there for seafood. It's just we don't have the supply or the means to get it to the market. So yeah, I'm not completely sure on how to go about getting there, but these are the problems that we're facing here on Kauai. And yeah, I think a lot of fishermen are really upset about the fact that frozen mainland fish is being sold here as raw right next to their own fresh product, and more people are buying the frozen treated fish than the fresh. And I think it all comes down really to outreach and education. And yeah, pretty much that's my deal.
Jen, that I know we could go on for a long time about additional challenges, and I think you've touched on a lot of them. And you've also noted, just energy costs, particularly for Kauai, for making ice and just about everything, fuel, diesel. Let's not even talk about diesel costs, but it's important for everybody to hear what the challenges are on Kauai, because we're behind. I think, as Jen knows, on some of the other islands, there's so much more opportunity to, at least in some cases, sell directly. And Jen's comment too about the failure to note in our grocery stores, we, unlike on the Big Island, for example, KTA, we also lack the large impact from grocery stores that are owned locally and that have committed to buying and have the supply of fresh local fish that can be relied on. Examples that you could see in the Big Island, including poke, fresh poke. We know we have a problem of scale and cost and everything else, as Jen highlighted. But the one thing I think that what we all hope to do with this first effort is, everybody talks about it, what all the problems are, and everyone says, but it's a no-brainer that there are solutions, because other communities have found solutions. And that's why we brought many of our panelists to Kauai through these workshops that are recorded, because clearly we have to change and give opportunity for our local fishers and food suppliers. And the ocean producers have been left out, but it's such an incredible opportunity. And I think if we can keep momentum going and capture the interests of our fleets and the producers, which is, as Jen notes, is a challenge always among for fishermen. We all know it, especially on islands. But everybody wants a fair price, and everybody would welcome more chances to sell. Jen touched on the reality here that most local fish goes out at roadside, which, as she knows, is someone that inspects that. I mean, technically, not enforcement, but we all know that Kauai in particular is a roadside sale, and no one's gotten hurt. But anyway, so many challenges. But as we've heard from our panelists today, how they started, how they got going, how they went after the money, the grants, the organization. Money is out there. We know it. Money has been there for ag, and it's there for ocean producers. And now we just have to find the right group of passionate people to take these ideas and move them forward, and to present them to our community, Kauai County, to the state. Clay Tam who's my partner on this project, who is very much involved in Oahu with council and industry there, but as Clay knows, Kauai is a really unique place with some really interesting advantages of having really delicious ocean products and fish and other things, and even small scale now production of mollusks. I just toured the Kauai Sea Farm yesterday, incredible stuff. So not to go on too long, but first of all, I want to thank each of our speakers today, Pete, there's Mark, there's Steve, and Jen, for really bringing this project as far as our expert panel to a magnificent last meeting for this part of our work. And Clay Tam and I and Pacific Islands Fisheries Group would really like to thank everybody that's participated. But this is just the first step, as we say. These really insightful and very valuable comments and panel contributions are recorded. We're going to package them so that we can take them out on the road to get Kauai people excited about it. The next step will be going to people that buy fish on the island, the restaurants, and incredible other advantages, the Kauai Community College, and incredible chefs that are trained here on Kauai and actually brought some of their best recipes to Oahu. And so we on Kauai have the talent. The next thing, the young, energetic people like Jen and many others will take the knowledge that you've helped share, all of our panelists, and try to make something happen. And so that's the next phase. So again, thank everybody for fabulous contributions. And you'll get some follow-up. We hope you will get follow-up from us. And we look forward to getting you to Kauai one way or the other. Come visit us and help us in person. So thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate your expertise. And we say safe travels wherever you are. Mahalo and aloha.